What's up, everybody? So, we're still riding high off that Kissinger pack. If you've been living under a rock, the most objectively evil man in American foreign policy, the most objectively evil man worldwide during the second half of the 20th century, passed last night. Well, I should say passed. You say passed about somebody that you are unhappy that they died, right? So Kissinger bit the dust. He went to that big round table under the ground. He's sitting in Lucifer's seat. And like comrades were saying last night, is this a victory for the left? No, because he died not after being executed by a war crimes tribunal. He did not pass violently, even though he made many, many people pass violently. He died rich and comfortable in his bed, surrounded by his family. So we got to do better. That's all I'll say about that. We got to do better. These people should not live to be 100 fucking years old. That's an insult to anybody that calls themselves a leftist. But at the same time, we also shouldn't be spoiled sports, and we should let people get in where they fit in and get their laughs and their kicks where they can. He won. No cap. I mean, yeah, he died old and rich. Not just old, but over old. I saw on Twitter earlier where somebody that was tasked with writing his obituary actually died before he did. But evil is evil in an evil world is long lived. So let's rank some obituaries. Let's see what people have been saying about this fella. He doesn't even deserve the term fellow. Well, I guess NAFO would award him the title of fella. It is a shame that he lived a long and happy life. Like I said, these people do not deserve to get old. So, Rolling Stone, noted for its snark, Henry Kissinger, war criminal beloved by America's ruling class, finally dies. This is Rolling Stone at its best. Henry Kissinger died on Wednesday at his home in Connecticut. His consulting firm said in a statement, the notorious war criminal was 100. Measuring purely by confirmed kills, the worst mass murderer ever executed by the United States was the white supremacist terrorist Timothy McVeigh. On April 19, 1995, McVeigh detonated a massive bomb at the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people, including 19 children. The government killed McVeigh by lethal injection in June 2001. Whatever hesitation a state execution provokes, even over a man such as McVeigh, necessary questions about the legitimacy of killing even an unrepentant soldier of white supremacy, his death provided a measure of closure to the mother of one of his victims. It's a period at the end of a sentence, said Kathleen Trainer, whose 4-year-old McVeigh killed. McVeigh, who in his own psychotic way thought he was saving America, never remotely killed on the scale of Kissinger, the most revered American grand strategist of the second half of the 20th century. I was wondering, whenever writing this, were they thinking about like Osama bin Laden? He was technically executed, summarily, of course, by the United States. So, eh. So, the Yale University historian Greg Grandin lays 3 and 4 million people, 3 and 4 million bodies at Kissinger's feet. So his crimes include crimes of commission, such as in Cambodia and Chile, and omission, such as greenlighting Indonesia's bloodshed in East Timor, Pakistan's bloodshed in Bangladesh, and the inauguration of an American tradition of using and then abandoning the Kurds. The poor Kurds, they've been kicked around and fucked over so much. One day they will have their free homeland. But so you got shit that he actually like ordered, he actually took part in, and stuff that he was just like, oh yeah, go ahead, we don't care. So like he was directly involved in Cambodia and Chile because him and Nixon got together and decided to bomb the fuck out of the country. And Chile, he and the Nixon administration got together and decided to topple the legally elected Marxist government of Salvador Allende. And so those can be laid directly at his feet. Like we could say that Kissinger helped do this, but we can also say that Kissinger helped murder millions of communists and communist supporters in um, Indonesia. and also in East Timor. And Pakistan invaded Bangladesh in 1971, I believe, and that was another bloody incident. So I said Indonesia was responsible for the murder of communists in 1965. I don't think Kissinger was really like an advisor at that level in 65, but like he would definitely have approved of it. He would definitely have approved of it. No infamy will find Kissinger on a day like today. Instead, a demonstration of why he was able to kill so many people and get away with it the day of his passage will be a solemn one in Congress. And shamefully, since Kissinger had reporters like CBS's Marvin Kolb and the New York Times' Hendrik Smith, we're going to go to the New York Times later, wiretapped newsroom. So this guy bugged journalists, and now journalists are falling over their own fucking shoes, kissing his ass. And the Rolling Stone article goes on to describe him as a practitioner of American greatness and lionized by the press as the cold blooded genius who restored America's prestige from the agony of Vietnam. Prestige in whose eyes, might I ask? Certainly not in the eyes of the Cambodian people. Certainly not in the eyes of the American people. Like any American with a conscience knows that Henry Kissinger was a fucking war criminal. Like they don't need to have this explained to them. But unfortunately, there are quite a few Americans who have no conscience, and they are not celebrating the death of this hawk of hawks. Many liberals and reactionary conservatives alike, like they're actually upset that this guy passed at the age of 100. Like, what did you expect him to do? Live forever? Like 100-year-old guys die. Jimmy Carter is probably going to die very, very soon. Hell, maybe in the next few days. So, like, when old people die, especially evil ass old people like Kissinger, like, we shouldn't be shocked. But, yeah, I digress. It's always valuable to hear the reverent tones with which American elites speak of their monsters. When the Kissingers of the world pass, their humanity, their purpose, their sacrifices are foremost in the minds of the respectable. What humanity, what purpose, what sacrifices did Henry Kissinger ever make? This man cared about nobody but himself. Hell, he didn't even care about the people he worked for. When Nixon got unasked and forced to resign in 74, Kissinger stayed on. This was a social and political climber par excellence. American elites recoiled in disgust when Iranians in great numbers took to the streets to honor one of their monsters, Qasem Soleimani, after a U.S. drone strike executed the Iranian external security chief in January of 2020. Soleimani, whom the United States declared to be a terrorist and killed as such, killed far more people than Timothy McVeigh. But even if we attribute to him all the deaths in the Syrian civil war, never in Soleimani's wildest dreams could he kill as many people as Henry Kissinger. Nor did Soleimani get to date Jill St. John, who played Bond girl Tiffany Case in Diamonds Are Forever. So how did Kissinger come to power? He basically undermined his he basically played one political rival, one political player off another. So in 1968, he was an influential Cold War defense intellectual, aka evil asshole at Harvard. He had access to members of the diplomatic delegation to the Paris talks. So he leaked information from these talks to Richard Nixon's presidential campaign. He leaked information from the Paris peace talks to a rival of the guy that he had worked for. He worked for Nelson Rockefeller. He was an advisor for to Nelson Rockefeller's campaign, and he also had close political ties to the group around Hubert Humphrey, Nixon's Democratic rival. So this is important. There's a really good piece of analysis that a comrade posted earlier. Let me see. Let me find it. I share too much shit on Twitter. Karl Rove. Gross. Here we go. Kissinger represented something fundamentally old world, a pre ideological, pre democratic orientation to politics. He was the foreign minister to the monarch. He dealt in reasons and arcana of state, Policy was a chess game. He was a courtier, flattering his way to the top. To a democratic people, this could never really be an attractive set of pretension, except to those who also fancy themselves aristocrats. But in the world of napalm and the atomic bomb, such amorality loses its naughty charm. It becomes something obscene, grinning, perverse. Yeah, good analysis. Kissinger lived life like he was maxing in a paradox game. Y'all are funny. I should have one of you all on as my co-host one of these days. So Nixon ran for president, claiming to have a secret plan to end the war. His advisors told Hirsch that they were deeply afraid that Johnson and Hanoi would reach an accord before the election. Imagine being afraid that peace is going to be made because you think it's going to spoil the election for you. It would save lives in Vietnam, American and Vietnamese, but it would undermine Nixon's hope of exploiting the explosion in domestic anti-war sentiment. Nixon gratefully took what Kissinger gave him to make the US's proxy regime in Saigon, whose regime peace would destabilize, more intransigent. So this proxy regime, the South Vietnamese government, was basically a bunch of crooks. It was a kleptocracy in the strictest sense of the word. Like, these people did not give a shit about governing. They did not give a shit about running their country well. They didn't give a shit about democracy. They didn't give a shit about anything but seeing how much money they could steal and how they could get their hands on more Yankee dollars. Okay, so peace with North Vietnam would not be good because you'd have a bunch of these South Vietnamese people deciding that, you know what, we can get rid of these fucking crooks. And North Vietnamese, they run their shit very well. They actually care about the people. So let's get rid of these crooks that we have governing us or pretending to govern us. So they didn't want that. Kissinger was playing Hearts of Iron 4 in real life and forgot the game ends after World War II. So, as we know, the peace agreement wasn't reached until 73 because of this stalling. And the war ended in American humiliation with Hanoi's 1975 victory. Also, fun fact, Nixon actually wanted to use nuclear weapons. Like, his idea was to convince the North Vietnamese that he was so crazy. And they actually seriously discussed nuking North Vietnam. Let me pull this up. Here we go. Nixon wanted to drop nuclear bomb on Vietnam. Here we go. A wild orgasm of anarchists sweeping across the country like a prairie fire. Anyways, um, he also, like, to get an idea of how evil Nixon was. Like, Henry Kissinger literally had to chastise him for not being concerned about civilian casualties. Not saying that Kissinger cared about civilians, but he was like, I don't want you to be marked in history as a butcher because I don't want to work for a fucking butcher. I cannot have my courtiership. I cannot have my image sullied by working for an evil person. And Nixon was like, I don't give a fuck. So, let's see. So, in Nixon's own words, the only place you and I disagree, this is Nixon, mind you, is with regard to the bombing. You're so goddamn concerned about the civilians, and I don't give a damn. I don't care. Then he goes on to say, I'd rather use the nuclear bomb. Does that bother you? I just want you to think big. And Kissinger goes on to say that I don't want you to be that's too much. Like, I'm an evil dude. I'm Henry Kissinger. I'm an evil dude. But you bombing with nukes innocent civilians, that's too much for even my evil. And Nixon's like, you're just soft. You care too much. So once in the White House, Nixon and Kissinger, this troubled duo, found themselves without leverage to produce a peace accord with Hanoi. So they came up with the madman theory, the idea that North Vietnam would negotiate peace after they came to believe Nixon was adventurous and bloodthirsty enough to risk anything, including nuclear weapons. In February 1969, weeks after taking office and lasting through April 1970, U.S. warplanes secretly dropped 110,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia in 1 month. By the summer of 1969, according to a colonel on the Joint Staff, Kissinger, who had no constitutional role in the military chain of command, was personally selecting bombing targets. So this guy, with his Coke bottle glasses, was hunched over a map of Cambodia and Vietnam and was like, yeah, hit here and here and here and here. So that's how you get blood directly on your hands. An act of commission. You committed this shit. And the level of his involvement, you have Colonel Raby Sinton, hell of a name, who was saying that not only was Henry carefully screening the raids, he was reading the raw intelligence. A second phase of bombing continued until August 1973, 5 months after the final U.S. combat troops withdrew from Vietnam. By then, U.S. bombs had killed an estimated 100,000 people out of a population of only 7 million. The final phase of the bombing, which occurred after the Paris Peace Accords mandated U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam, was its most intense, an act of cruel vengeance from a thwarted superpower. So they decided to meddle in Cambodia, and before that, they had been fucking around in Laos. So basically, all of Southeast Asia was a giant bombing range. Sometimes the bombs fell and hit little children, and then their fathers would be off with the Khmer Rouge. Who said this? A former Khmer Rouge cadre. Kissinger played a role in the deaths of so many different peoples that treating each with due consideration requires writing a book. Here is one example among many of the sort of carnage Kissinger inflicted indirectly rather than by edict. In 1971, the Pakistani government waged a campaign of genocide to suppress the independence movement in what was to become Bangladesh. Pakistan's Yahya Khan, an architect of the genocide, was valuable to Nixon's ambitions of restoring democratic relations with China, not China's finest hour. So the U.S. let Khan's forces rape and murder at least 300,000 people and perhaps 3 million. We can't allow a friend of ours and China's to get screwed in a conflict with a friend of India's, Nixon quoted Kissinger, shrugging. That perspective typified Kissinger. The Cold War was a geopolitical balance among two great powers. The purpose of Cold War statecraft was to maximize American freedom of action to inflict Washington's will on the world. So this wasn't about democracy. This wasn't about freedom. This wasn't about liberty, because if it was, they wouldn't have backed people who suppressed democracy, freedom, and liberty. Like, how the fuck would you back a Yahya Khan or a Pinochet? Like, these are not good people, or a Mobutu Sese Seko, or apartheid South Africa. Like, these were not good fucking people. These people didn't care about anything besides ruling with brutal, maximal force, and of course, killing many, many communists. The fact that they liked killing many, many communists is why the United States backed them. Kissinger was right there and putting us into alliances with all sorts of horrible people that were despised by their own people. The purpose of Cold War statecraft was to maximize American freedom of action to inflict Washington's will on the world, a zero-sum contest that meant restricting the ability of the USSR to inflict Moscow's. Without the destabilization or outright Armageddon that would result from pursuing a final defeat of the Soviets. So it was basically brinkmanship. Like, okay, we'll push you to the edge, but we're not going to go over the edge, because if we go over the edge, we're all going to die. So we'll fuck with you here. You fuck with us there. We'll fuck with you here. Of course, millions of mostly brown people are going to die. But at least temporarily, we'll get what we want in this little hunk of the world. That last part explains much right-wing hostility towards Kissinger. Kissinger represented anti-communism without ideological zeal. So yeah, the Birchers hated this guy. He was an energetic, even relentless practitioner of the Cold War, the theater of anti-communist conflict. But like George Kennan before him, Kissinger thought that viewing the Cold War in ideological terms missed the point. The point was American geopolitical dominance, something measured in impunity and achieved by any means necessary. That permitted Nixon and Kissinger the creativity to reopen China, something Nixon would have demagogued anyone else for attempting. Reopening China was by far the greatest achievement of Nixon's foreign policy. It was the rare geopolitical initiative where Kissinger was a mere facilitator. Cy Hertz calls Nixon the grand theoretician of rapprochement with Beijing, with Kissinger Nixon's occasional operative. Kissinger's dramatic secret 1971 trip to Beijing in advance of Nixon's visit probably renders that description parsimonious. But, writes Hirsch, there's no evidence that Kissinger seriously considered the question of American-Chinese rapprochement before his appointment as Nixon's national security advisor. And Kissinger ended up becoming a celebrity because of his trip to Beijing. Nixon was one of the original Cold War demagogues, the man who never hesitated to identify communism with black people. Nixon actually also thought that black people were too stupid to be communists and too stupid to be spies. Like, this guy was also an extreme anti-Semite. But, again, Kissinger was the penultimate, he was the epitome of an opportunist. Like, he didn't give a shit that this dude was an anti-Semite. Like, Nixon literally said that Jews could not be trusted on the Israel question. But he went there and worked with the liberals. Why? Because it was a way to secure personal power for himself. He had the ear of the most powerful man in the world, so he was willing to put up with the occasional anti-Semitic slur. Well, not even the occasional anti-Semitic slur, the frequent anti-Semitic slur, just so he could have this access to power. And the Eastern establishment liberals who postured as allies. His escalation in Vietnam, along with the secret bombing in Cambodia he revealed in a televised address, prompted a resurgence of the anti-war movement. Nixon exploited the mass protests by contrasting them with the silent majority of loyal Americans. Instead of ending the war as he had campaigned on during and silencing or co-opting the anti-war movement in the process, Nixon inflamed a culture war to distract from it. Sound familiar? It was an echo of his infamous Southern strategy to harness for the Republican Party the electoral benefits of white backlash to the civil rights movement. The Republicans have been reaping that fucking whirlwind for decades. In Southeast Asia, Kissinger destroyed, but in Chile, he helped build a template for the world in which we currently live. On September 4th, 1970, Chileans elected the democratic socialist Salvador Allende president. Allende's program was more than redistributionist. It demanded reparations from the U.S. for exploiting it. Chile is rich in copper, and by the mid-1960s, 80% of its copper production was controlled by American corporations, particularly the firms Anaconda Copper and Kennecott. When Allende nationalized mining assets held by the two companies, Allende informed them that he would deduct estimated excess profit from a compensatory package he was willing to pay the firms. It was a sort of unacceptable policy that prompted Kissinger to remark during an intelligence meeting about 2 months before Allende's election, "I don't see why we need to stand idly by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its own people. Arrogance and hubris." Here he is smirking as protesters behind him, shielded by bodyguards, of course, demand accountability for basically everything Kissinger did. His arm is also in a sling. I wonder what for. Kissinger meant that there must never be an example of a country in America's sphere of influence delivering socialism through the ballot. Henry saw Allende as being a far more serious threat than Castro, Kissinger staffer Morris told Hirsch. Allende was a living example of democratic social reform in Latin America. So this is interesting. Like, everybody thinks that communists are like violent and we're just going to go and like take over everything through force and tanks and guns and bombs. Like, they did not want an example of socialism coming to power through the ballot. Because if socialism can come to power through the ballot in Chile, it can come to power through the ballot in the United States. Of course, as a Maoist, I realized that socialism cannot come to power by the ballot because the ruling class, as Chile demonstrated, will not allow it. Like in Chile, the bourgeoisie did not just roll over. The domestic bourgeoisie did not just roll over, nor did the international bourgeoisie represented by Anaconda and Kennecott. Like, no, they literally hoarded milk, hoarded food, starved kids to death to try to prove a point and make the masses turn out of the streets and hoping that they would blame all this shit on Allende. That's how evil the bourgeoisie is. So, no, socialism cannot come to power through the ballot. That's what a lot of people get wrong. But Kissinger and Nixon wanted to set an example. Don't even think about it. So you have this guy, the U.S. ambassador in Chile, Edward Corey, who was second to none in opposing Allende, cabled Kissinger that to actively encourage a coup could lead us to a Bay of Pigs failure. An apoplectic Kissinger told Corey to stay out of the way, according to Tim Weiner's book, Legacy of Ashes, The History of the CIA. They even tried to do a January 6th in Chile. Like they literally tried to get the Chilean Congress to riot and stop Allende from taking office. Then Al Haig, Kissinger's second, said that there were key left-wing dominated slots in the CIA, basically saying that you've got commies in the fucking CIA, the most anti-communist organization on the face of the earth. He even said, why not support extremists, meaning like literal fascists, people like the killers that Pinochet relied on to throw people out of helicopters. Like, again, evil, evil, evil. So after Pinochet came to power, the World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank loaned Pinochet $3.1 billion between 76 and 86. Friedrich von Hayek's neoliberal Mont Pelerin Society held a 1981 meeting in the very city where the junta plotted the replacement of democratic socialism with the harbinger of today's neoliberal global economic order. Pinochet's torture chambers were the maternity ward of neoliberalism, a baby delivered, bloody and screaming, by Henry Kissinger. This was the just and liberal world order Hillary Clinton, who I also hope is not long for this world, considered Kissinger's life work. So Kissinger actually met with Pinochet in Santiago in June of 76 because Congress was pissy because Pinochet was doing horrible things like arresting people for no reason and throwing people out of helicopters because somebody said that they were communists and doing all other sorts of horrible things. Like Victor Yara, they literally broke the dude's fingers, smashed his hands with a sledgehammer, and then mockingly told him to play his guitar and sing before they executed him. Kissinger said that he was going to be obliged to make an anodyne criticism of Pinochet to forestall adverse legislation. Basically saying, I'm going to say some bad things about you, but don't take them seriously. You're still my boy. Kissinger's real opinion was that Hillary did consider Kissinger a dear friend. My evaluation is that you are a victim of all left-wing groups around the world, Kissinger said, according to a declassified cable, and that your greatest sin was that you overthrew a government which was going communist. Let's see, said declassified cable. Yeah, talks about how he covered up atrocities in Chile. He dismissed American human rights campaigns against Chile's government as domestic problems and assured Pinochet that he was against sanctions such as the proposed Kennedy Amendment to ban arms aid to governments that were gross human rights violations. So, you don't want to sanction apartheid South Africa. You don't want to sanction Chile under Pinochet. You don't want to sanction all of these horrible fascist regimes that are doing demonstrable war crimes. But you want to keep Cuba, a country which has offended nobody but the worst people on the face of the earth, under sanctions. You want to fix it so that they have to reuse medical supplies. We have a practical problem we have to take into account without bringing about pressures incompatible with your dignity, and at the same time, which does not lead to U.S. laws which will undermine our relationship. I learn something new about this asshole every time I read one of these articles. Like his evil has no bottom. Like Yeah, I'm a communist. Okay, I've been a communist for quite a while, but it's sickening. It's I'm rarely surprised, but the depth of this is it's stunning. Operation Condor was an international campaign of right-wing assassinations pursued by the anti-communist regimes of Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay, home of the Tupamaros. Kissinger has instructed that no further action be taken on this matter, meaning like cross-border, transnational assassinations. 5 days later, a car bomb emplaced by Pinochet's agents detonated along Washington, D.C.'s Embassy Row, killing Orlando Letelier, Allende's foreign minister, and his American co-worker, Ronnie Moffat. So you have a car bomb planted by fascists that literally killed an American, and you don't give a fuck. The more you learn about Kissinger, the more you see how pointless the Nobel Peace Prize is. That is my favorite chat of the night. Kissinger lived for over half a century in the world he had made. He was its hubris. He could see that the Iraq war would be a disaster, but he went along with it anyway, declaring the case for removing Iraq's capacity of mass destruction is extremely strong. Kissinger's calculation, expressed in the noblest possible way, is that acceptance of an impending disaster is the price of influencing and hence mitigating it. So he was basically on some fourth dimensional chess shit. His accommodation to the inevitability of political decisions he thought were folly harkened back to the 68 embrace of Nixon. What were the lives of Vietnamese, Cambodians, and or Iraqis compared to Kissinger's opportunity to help shape history? Whatever bitterness Kissinger in his final days experienced over the erosion of his enterprise is little comfort to his millions of victims. America denied them the closure Kathleen Trainer experienced when America, declaring justice, ended Timothy McVeigh. Kind of reads like an argument for the for the for putting Henry Kissinger to death, to be honest. Like, yeah, in a just world, this guy would have been hauled before a war crimes tribunal and given the needle. But we do not live in a just world yet. We have to create the just world. The second you learn who Alfred Nobel was, you see how performative the Nobel Peace Prize is. Yeah, imagine getting a fucking prize from the guy who invented dynamite and various other explosives. Guilty conscience much? So, yeah, this is a definite 10 out of 10. Very well researched, very well developed, and it doesn't pull any punches. Rolling Stone has some bangers quite often. The New York Times, who Henry Kissinger bugged. Diplomat who long held the global stage, was both celebrated and reviled. Let's see. So these are our reactions to his passing. Here's, oops. To many Chinese, Kissinger's death ends an era of engagement with the U.S. Engagement for what? State media outlets hailed Kissinger as China's old friend. On Chinese social media, people said his death marked the end of an era. They recalled his last visit to the country in July at age 100. So, if you don't think that China is a capitalist country, all you got to do is look at this picture. You've got the supposed leader, the supposed socialist boss, the guy who's going to lead us all to revolution or at least some type of reform or whatever, sitting here next to a guy whose war crimes were very painstakingly detailed in the obituary that I just read. Like, in what world do socialists sit up with war criminals? Yes, I know that Mao met with Kissinger. But again, that was at the instigation of a revisionist clique within his party, a rightist clique within his party. Like, what a lot of people understand when they pull that picture up of Mao shaking hands with Nixon and Kissinger hovering in the background is that, like, Mao was not, he wasn't Pol Pot. He wasn't brother number one. Like, he did not have totalizing control over Chinese society. He was just basically first among equals. Okay. Like, there were people that had a similar amount of power within the party, especially as his health started to decline. Like, he wasn't like king or emperor of China, okay? Like, he could be shot down. And especially during the Cultural Revolution, you had various struggles and factions within the party. So Chou Enlai, who was basically China's foreign affairs head, if you will, um, he was also very keen on rehabilitating and sheltering rightists from the winds of the Cultural Revolution. So, hold on, there's a good article I had up earlier. But yeah, I wouldn't call him like a hard rightist, but he was definitely a centrist because centrists enable the right. Let me find it. It's a good article from the RCP before it went shitty that was released, I think, a couple years after Mao's death. Here we go. Reactionary mantle of Chou Enlai. I would not write it. I would not call Chou Enlai a reactionary, but here's the 70s, and Maoists have always been very bombastic. So, here we go. In the name of opposing Lin Biao, the right, led by Chou Enlai, argued for rehabilitating the overwhelming majority of cadre knocked down during the Cultural Revolution, including unrepentant capitalist voters such as Deng Xiaoping, with little more than a token self-criticism. So when communists self-criticize, it's supposed to be thorough because we have to get to the ideological roots of our mistakes and our crimes, right? So just saying, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. That's not a self criticism. That's an apology. That's actually avoiding self criticism. So the article goes on to say, in the name of fending off a Soviet attack, the right, again led by Shou, jumped on the necessity of making an opening to the West to avoid forming a strategic alliance, to advocate, I'm sorry, forming a strategic alliance with U.S. imperialism and its bloc and dropping support for revolutionary struggles around the world. Mao also saw the need to make certain agreements and compromises with the West to deal with the growing Soviet threat to China. However, Mao was agreeing to some of Chou's policies with completely different objectives in mind, as was to become clear later. I don't agree with all of this. Like, I don't agree that it was necessary to make agreements and compromises with the West. Mao was a pragmatist. That's part of why I like him. But I don't think that it was necessary. Some Maoists would disagree. Mao Zedong thought people would definitely disagree. But like, you do not have to embrace a an imperialism that's across the ocean to fight the imperialism that's on top of you. By this time, Zhou Enlai and other top party leaders allied with him had concluded that China's defense and economic construction, aka the theory of the productive forces, we must be a strong country, socialist or not, basically bourgeois nationalism posturing as communism, depended on accommodation and alliance with the Western imperialist countries, a consistent feature of Zhou's thinking since perhaps as far back as 1949 or even further. Zhou's policies, that of placing modernization above class struggle, putting bourgeois experts and efficiency in command, telling the workers and peasants to stay in their place and like it, and throwing the door open to the exploitation of China by foreign capital in exchange for advanced technology, aka everything that has happened since 1978, had much in common with the revisionist lines that came under fire during the first few years of the Cultural Revolution, with the main difference being that Liu Shaoqi, China's Khrushchev, and Lin Biao after him were advocating capitulation to the Soviet social imperialists instead of to the imperialist West. Zhou Enlai and others saw that their interests would be best served by the defeat of these Soviet-style revisionists. Thus, they joined forces with Mao and the revolutionary left, who saw that Liu and later Lin Biao posed the most immediate danger of usurping power and dragging China back to capitalism. So basically, this article argues that China was caught between Soviet social imperialism and American old school imperialism, and that certain factions, Liu Shaoqi and his clique, wanted to align with Soviet social imperialism, and Zhou Enlai and his clique wanted to align with the West because their idea was that the West had better technology and more resources to help China modernize, so to speak. Nothing about relying on the force and strength of your almost a billion people, but we have to have a big brother to help us modernize. If you talk to any revisionists today, they'll tell you the same bullshit to make excuses for the horrible and stupid things that China is doing in Africa. So yeah, China is mourning him because China is a revisionist country. He, I still can't get enough of this fucking picture. Anyways, the war in Gaza is marked by Kissinger's work in the Middle East. Like every war that's going on today, every bullshit war or atrocity traces back to either the British or to this asshole. And Kissinger also ruined Egypt because Egypt was initially in the Soviet sphere of influence in Nasser's day, but it wanted to being in the American sphere of influence. Kissinger's legacy still ripples through Vietnam and Cambodia. This is the aftermath of Kissinger's. Hell, he might have even ordered this bombing raid in May 1970. So, I watched that John Pilger documentary last week about like the hell that was wrought upon Cambodia by both the United States and the revisionist Khmer Rouge. Well, the Khmer Rouge was so shitty that I wouldn't even call it revisionist. There's something beyond revisionist. Dare I say fascist? But like Kissinger was responsible for this. Like it was bombings like this that were responsible for the rise in support of the Khmer Rouge. Like if you have a bunch of people that come into town and help you replant your rice and all that stuff after an atrocity like this happens, you got to back them. In Cambodia, that ended up being the fucking Khmer Rouge. And after they came to power, they showed their true face. In Africa, Kissinger was known for his failures. Everybody failed in Africa. Africa's for the Africans, not for the Kissingers of the world. So, Angola. How did he ruin Angola? Up until getting his ass whooped in Southeast Asia, Kissinger thought that Africa was totally irrelevant. He also ignored the State Department's own Africa experts, Miss Mitchell said, calling them missionaries and do-gooders. So, did he go to Africa to do good things? No. In Africa, Kissinger teamed up with the apartheid government of South Africa and one of Africa's most notorious dictators, Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, to defeat Angola's left-leaning rebels, the MPLA. But these rebels enjoyed popular support and soon the help of thousands of Cuban troops. Nobody expects the Cuban troops. A twist Mr. Kissinger had failed to predict. Kissinger thought he could rack up an easy win in Angola, Miss Mitchell said, and he lost. That began a string of misjudgments. I wouldn't consider a stupid war that you got involved in and you exacerbated to be a misjudgment, but go off New York Times would characterize Mr. Kissinger's ham-handed attempts to steer events on the African continent. The Angolan War raged for years, killing at least 500,000 people. And the same leftist rebels that Mr. Kissinger tried so hard to defeat through African proxies eventually won. The year after that war started, in 1976, Mr. Kissinger became seized with the idea of bringing peace to Rhodesia. How the fuck can you have peace with Rhodesia, a country that is literally founded on enslaving indigenous Africans and setting up London in the jungle? Another southern African country embroiled in a liberation war. He failed there too. His track record in the global south, especially in Africa, is dismal. Kissinger just didn't understand the popularity and power of the black liberation movements. When Mugabe's name came up in a meeting, Kissinger asked, "Who's that?" He got a Nobel Peace Prize, which doesn't mean shit. Here he is meeting with another ghoul, Hillary Clinton, who considered him a very close personal friend. When Kissinger turned 100 this year, Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken toasted him at one birthday celebration in New York, and the CIA director, William J. Burns, did so at another in Washington. There is a reason. Kissinger managed to retain his role as advisor to Washington's key policymakers a half century after he left office, oftentimes because what he did then was so relevant to the crises of today. Mr. Kissinger spoke with Mr. Blinken regularly, including as recently as last month, Mr. Blinken said. He has also consulted with previous ghouls, including Condoleezza Rice, Hillary Clinton, who took heat for these conversations during her campaign, John Kerry, and Mike Pompeo. But he wasn't some retired coach reminiscing about the good old days. Instead, he remained the ultimate backchanneler, especially to leaders in China. In July, Mr. Kissinger secretly flew to China by private jet since it's an arduous flight, even if you're not 100 years old, at the specific invitation of Xi Jinping. So Xi Jinping was not just working with this dude because, okay, yeah, he's the guy that opened our country up to the United States and set us on the path where everybody that has connections in the party can get rich. Xi Jinping literally sent for this ghoul to come and see him for his 100th birthday. And Xi Jinping did not take him to task for his crimes all around the world, but Xi Jinping called him an old friend and during a lengthy dinner told him that China and the United States relations will be forever linked to the name Kissinger. So, the New York Times is a liberal rag. It carries water like it is basically the bourgeois of the bourgeois press. But and it's hilarious that they're writing this long ass thing for a guy that bugged them. But like, um, decently researched article. I learned shit that I didn't know. So I'm gonna give it, I guess, a 7.5 out of 10 because it's still the fucking New York Times. And I really hate like liberal pretensions of objectivity. Like, just come out and say that you have the spine of a jellyfish. You write about whatever the people who pay you tell you to write about. He has been accused of breaking. Like, see, I hate it when people write like this. He has not been accused. He broke. He broke international law by authorizing the secret carpet bombing of Cambodia in 1969 and 1970, an undeclared war on an ostensibly neutral nation. Mr. Kissinger told the military to strike anything that flies or anything that moves. At least 50,000 civilians were killed. This motherfucker killed 50,000 people, and you're just saying that he has been accused. No, say he broke. God, liberals make me sick. Trump had a bust of Martin Luther King in his office. I did not know that. Maybe he had black guests visiting. I just got to go to sleep, but I just wanted to say that your last two interview streams were 10 out of 10. I really enjoyed them. Keep it up. Thank you. That means a lot. I'm going to try to get more. Oh, let's look at his life and photos. I'm not creating a free account to watch. Man, kiss my ass. I'll do it later. Let's see what else I'm going to review. Where's Teen Vogue one? Oh, yeah. This is Drew Pavlo. He spent the last couple days sicking NAFO on did he oversee the use of Agent Orange? Uh I think so. Any horrible thing that happened during the Vietnam War, I know I stupidly blamed him for the Indonesian massacre of communists in 65 when we're actually talking about the Indonesian invasion of East Timor. But like Kissinger was an advisor at Harvard, so he probably played a role in the Indonesian issue, well, the Indonesian genocide as well. So any bad thing that happened after 1963, I guess, could probably be laid at the feet of Henry Kissinger, foreign policy wise. This is a good one. Yellow Peril Tactical. You should follow them if you aren't already. They're East and Southeast Asians, so people that are directly impacted by Henry Kissinger's bullshit. East and Southeast Asians during firearm education, celebrating our history and uplifting struggles across Asia and the diaspora. No capitalism, no racism. So Let's see what the comrades at Yellow Peril have to say. So last night, Kissinger died, and lots of people are celebrating. Yeah, his being alive was still sort of a meme, so let's talk a bit about what he did. Kissinger was the architect of so many of the American genocides and atrocities our government perpetrated during the Cold War, such as Pinochet's coup, mass killing and rape in Bengal, betrayal of Greek Cypriots to Turkey, and more. But most famously and most significant for us, Kissinger orchestrated so much of American imperialist policy towards Vietnam. This included, oops, go back. This includes wanton and indiscriminate bombing of not just Vietnam, but also America's secret war in Laos and Cambodia. Millions died as a direct result of these policies. This destruction was not an accident, indeed, it was the intended result. Kissinger's policies have had direct impacts on our own lives. It's not an exaggeration to say that Kissinger's policies are why some of us are writing to you from the United States and not Southeast Asia. Some of our own families fled the war as refugees. Kissinger got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 jointly with Lee Duc-tho, who declined it, for helping to establish a ceasefire and U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam, which, considering his previous attempts to destroy Vietnam, is sort of like rewarding someone beating the shit out of you for being like, you know what, I've decided to stop beating the shit out of you. In the end, Kissinger died of old age, not torn apart by an angry mob of his victims or locked up in The Hague. Through the end of his life, the respect of mainstream politicians and even liberal politicians like Hillary Clinton towards Kissinger is a failure of not just the left, but of everyone who thinks war crimes are bad. Kissinger was oft consulted for interviews and remained influential throughout his life. We're still living in the world Kissinger built. So, really good. 10 out of 10. I also really like their profile pic. But yeah, shoot them a follow and engage. Teen Vogue. Here we go. Henry Kissinger was a war criminal responsible for millions of deaths. Teen Vogue has actually been like the vanguard of mainstream left reporting for 5 or 6 years now. So let's see. On November 29th, former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who NPR calls I hate NPR, one of the country's most important foreign policy thinkers for more than half a century, died at 100. Kissinger was responsible for an estimated 3 to 4 million deaths, according to one historian, and millions of human rights violations across a long list of nations. Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, East Timor, Bangladesh, the Kurds, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Cyprus. So this guy was literally a refugee from the Nazis. So he fled one genocide. He came to the United States in 1938. He served in the army. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and he attended Harvard. And how can you, as a refugee from evil people who did a genocide against your people, come to the United States and instead of being a stalwart crusader to ensure that things like that never ever happen again, you actually ensure that things like this happen many, many times over? Like, this just shows that you're disconnected from your own people. Like, Henry Kissinger literally said that if he was not born Jewish, he would be anti-Semitic because, and I quote, a people who have been persecuted for 2,000 years have issues. Yeah, he worked for the anti-Semite Nixon. He literally sat up with this dude and got called all sorts of slurs to his face and behind his back. And he never even raised a word in defense of the Jewish people, his people, the people that he escaped Nazi Germany with, because he was too concerned about money and access to power. That's disgusting. Kissinger was basically a Jewish Tom. In the 70s, Kissinger was partially responsible for right-wing coup d'etat and government overthrows in Latin America, including Chile and Argentina. Oh yeah, while we're on the topic, I found out today that Likud, Bibi Netanyahu's party, actually put out a hit on this dude. Well, a right, like an ultra-right faction within Bibi Netanyahu's party actually put out a hit on Kissinger because they hated the fact that he helped negotiate between the Arabs and the Israelis. Like, how reactionary do you have to be to put out a hit on Henry Kissinger because Henry Kissinger is not right wing enough for you? Diehard clique of Israeli right wingers has put out a $150,000 contract for the assassination of Secretary of State Kissinger, the New York Daily News reported in 77, citing senior State Department officials. When reports of a possible hit on Kissinger first came out, it was reported to be the work of Palestinian militants. But senior officials told the paper that they were certain that the threat was emanating from the Likud party. The Likud hardliners who put up the money, described as a small radical splinter faction within Israel's Likud opposition bloc, were reportedly upset at Kissinger's diplomacy around the end of the 73 Arab-Israeli War. Kissinger had been instrumental in disengagement agreements with Egypt and Syria that saw Israel withdrawing from territories it had conquered. On the Israeli side, Likud's rival Labour Party had worked with Kissinger to agree to the compromises. Yeah, not very stable people. Upon news of Kissinger's death, the internet celebrated possibly more than it did after the last elderly imperial death, Queen Elizabeth's, but that celebration has been darkened by the basis for it. Joshua Hill posted a video from the 2010s of Kissinger being unrepentant about the deaths of Cambodians, where Kissinger's personally approved carpet bombing campaign still wounds and takes lives from cluster bombs more than 50 years later. Within 10 minutes of seeing this news, I started seeing the headlines: America's most notorious war criminal dead. Well, that was by the HuffPost. A teen Vogue classic. Donald Rumsfeld. Yuck. I thought he died like years ago, but apparently he only died 2 years ago. Dick Cheney is still alive, though. Controversial diplomat. Written by NPR, of course. That receives an automatic 0 out of 10 because, yeah, fuck NPR. And some spicier ones, such as Finally at the Leftist Tribune by Bhaskar Sankara, Rene Rojas, and Jonah Walters. Just by this title alone and the picture that they used, and this byline, Henry Kissinger's time on earth was spent organizing the slaughter of millions of people on behalf of the rich and powerful, whose respect for him translated party loyalties. May he rot in hell. I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. Kissinger's death has rid the world of a homicidal manager of American power, and we intend to dance on his grave. We prepared a book for this occasion. Only the Good Die Young, the verdict against Henry Kissinger. I'm going to order this tomorrow when I get paid. We wrote a book, Kissinger is Dead. Out now. Buy a copy. I guess I'm morally obliged to support Jacobin since I'm a DSA member, although I despise Bhaskar Sankara. But, yeah. I'm definitely getting a copy of this, especially because I want to see, like, Kissinger Dead, Jacobin Alive. Subscribe. Yeah, I want to see, read more about his fuckery in Africa. So yeah, this one from the Tribune definitely gets a 10 out of 10. Jacobin made a coupon code celebrating his death as well. When I said I despise Bhaskar Sankara, I mean that I strongly dislike. If I saw him, I would probably have a coffee with him or something. I think I had him as a friend on Facebook once, but I don't know. I think he blocked me or I blocked him. I think I might have blocked him. I'm too charismatic for people to block me. Anyways, so back to Teen Vogue. 10 out of 10. I'm a liberal grader tonight. HuffPost, I'm going to give it a half because HuffPost has always been mid. I don't like Huffington Post. Americans react to the death of Henry Kissinger. Let's see. This is The Onion, which I might add is actually a more credible news source than anything coming out of Israel, honestly, and like half of the American journalistic outlets. If you need real news, go to The Onion. James Kessler, psychologist. Look, being nice in life won't get you a Nobel Peace Prize. Sharon Thatcher, teacher. He wasn't just a war criminal, he was our war criminal. Whitney Plainfield, administrative assistant. He would have hated to see anyone die painfully and peacefully like this. Lisa Johnson, dietitian. I don't want to diminish his legacy by citing the Cambodian government's official death toll because I know the real number was much, much worse. The Onion is the closest the world will ever have to an oracle. I agree. Gia Garoni, delivery driver. Is that what I ran over last night? Krista Deacon, guidance counselor. May he be as bloodthirsty in death as he was in life. Melissa Stevens, mortgage banker. Love him or hate him. He'll always be remembered as the best goddamn contestant Rock of Love ever saw. Dan Potter, fireman. I sprayed some Agent Orange on my kids today in his honor. Your jeans already have Agent Orange in them, buddy. You're a fucking ginger. Brooke Pratt, pest control worker. Maybe she took out Kissinger. But he still had so many war crimes left in him. George W. Bush, former president. I remember the first day of my presidency, he was nice enough to send me an unexploded IED. Greg Bentley, graphic artist, but he looks so young in Oppenheimer. Al Preston, copywriter. If we all close our eyes and say a racial slur at the same time, maybe he'll come back to life. Carter Jacobs, electrician. Say what you will about the guy. Barack Obama, former president. He taught me that war didn't have to be fair. The most important part was that it was pointless and bloody. Tim Buchner, woodworker. That's what he gets for breaking into a house in a state with stand your ground laws. Alejandro Sotolongo, art director. Let he who has not carpet bombed Cambodia throw the first stone. Paul Flannery, line cook. This is just like Paul Walker all over again. Lisa Hitchens, file clerk. He put Cambodia on the map and almost took it off. Dick Cheney, retired. Nobody's perfect, but he came pretty close. I put money on him being next. Dean Verecci, software engineer. Oh, thank God, the last war criminal of the American government is finally dead. Kevin Spell, physical trainer. It brings a tear to my eye thinking of all the innocent people who will never get to die by his hand. Gene Schaefer, bus driver. If you think that man was impressive, you should taste my wife Beth's homemade potato salad. It's out of this world. Irene Stobbs, accountant. Oh no, Paula and Lewis's kid? Nick Farrington, dentist. I just hope we don't start tearing down all the Henry Kissinger monuments. I hope we don't build any. Jesse Untermeyer, music teacher. I hope he had just as much fun killing all those people as we had watching him kill them. George Huntington, retired. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Henry had the mind of a supervillain, the heart of a serial killer, and the elegant gams of a va-va-voom showgirl. Bashar al-Assad, president of Syria. Game recognizes game. Oh, wow. Well, that was a hell of a wrap-up. I imagine the tankies are going to be very upset with the Onion now. In 1973, Lee Duc Tho, the Vietnamese statesman and revolutionary, turned down the Nobel Peace Prize because it was jointly awarded to him and to that peace-unloving war criminal, Henry Kissinger. The Onion gets a 9 out of 10 because they had to throw in some fucking shade at Assad at the end. That was unnecessary, but they're a comedic organ. So, but they have their bangers. Actually, guys, Henry Kissinger living to be 100 is a failure, blah, blah, blah. Okay, why didn't you kill him then? I wanted to say that last night, but I didn't want to get banned. So, 10 out of 10. No matter your politics, it's disrespectful to joke about someone's death. Don't say Henry Kissinger died from a grand piano falling on his head and his mouth turned into piano keys, and then a big hammer fell on his dick and it honked like a bike horn. Don't say stuff like that. 10 out of 10. Oh, Bad Empanada, who I am extremely concerned about. Like, this guy says things that are even too spicy for me. Like, I'm scared that he's going to end up disappeared or in a black hole in Guantanamo. or somewhere horrible where he can't eat empanadas. Wow, the internet has been pretty harsh about Hitler's death. I get the disdain after his direct role in causing war crimes in Poland, Ukraine, and the Netherlands. However, we must remember we should generally attempt to apply nuance when looking at historical figures. I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10 because I'm pretty sure that ban empanada is not sane. Well, actually, looking at his videos, he is radically different. Like when he's doing serious political discussion, than he is being a dick on Twitter. This is him and his very tall wife. He looks like a Batman villain. She looks like Cruella de Vil. Boots Riley, my boy. Henry Kissinger, top U.S. diplomat responsible for millions of deaths, dies at 100. Few people have had a hand in as much death and destruction, as much human suffering, in so many places around the world as Henry Kissinger. Let's see, while we're on the topic of revolutionary rappers, let's see what my boy Loki has to say. Oh, I can't find him. Oh, temporary ceasefire ended. Explosions heard across the Gaza Strip. Well, they couldn't fucking wait. Damn, I forgot his Twitter. And that's sad because he. Ah, here we go. No, that's not him. Here we go. I'm sorry, Loki. Please don't unfollow me. It's interesting that MSNBC has canceled Mehdi Hassan's show. The channel still employs Moshe Arenstein, a former intelligence officer in the Israeli military, as a senior executive producer. He even produced the channel's coverage of Israel's 2006 war in Lebanon. Yeah, they took fucking Mehdi off, and he didn't even do anything. Like he was basically like a firm company man, and they just canceled his show for no fucking reason, for no reason whatsoever. Like, yeah, let's just pull our Arab off, dicks. And that's the thing with these Zionists. Like they they get everything they fucking want. Like they're able to just go around insult people in public, do all sorts of stupid shit, and they're not punished. Like look at these guys. These dudes these dudes got shot just because they had on keffiyehs and they were speaking Arabic in public.
Were not dressed the way that they were not speaking Arabic. I honestly do not think that our children would be in the situation that they're in now. I don't think that that would have happened. I don't think he would have been emboldened to shoot at someone that looks like him, would he? So, yeah.
So we've got one guy who was discharged. We've got another guy who suffered a spinal injury. This guy might be paralyzed for the rest of his life for the heinous and atrocious and unforgivable crime of being visibly proud, and visibly Palestinian. Huh. I don't see anything about fucking Kissinger. He's probably dropping his shit. He's probably recording a new track about it. Give him time. So that's pretty much all I have for me tonight. So who had the best professional obituary? Definitely Rolling Stone. Teen Vogue is there were a lot of ties because I'm pretty sure I gave everybody a 10 out of 10. But if I had to rank them, I would put Rolling Stone first. New York Times, probably, I guess, middling, but middling leaning towards the bottom. Who wants to be the first group of workers donning weapons? What are you talking about? But I don't know. One thing about the New York Times is that they're very in depth, but you also have to keep in mind that this is still a bourgeois rag. So you cannot just base your political opinions and beliefs on on things that you read in the New York Times, because this is still the fucking pinnacle of bourgeois journalism. So, but they're all right as a source of information. Tribune, it's all right. Probably give it a 9.5 out of 10. I can't even remember what I gave these fucking things. I'm so tired. But trending towards the top because, again, I am democratically centralist and obliged. I'm joking. DSA actually doesn't practice democratic centralism, but I'm obliged to support the comrades, even if I don't like Beskar Samkara all that much. Uh, NPR, trash. I can tell it's trash. Like, if you describe somebody who did objectively and documentedly horrible things as controversial, you're in the trash can. Teen Vogue gets a. I'll probably put them right under Rolling Stone. Onion under Teen Vogue because they didn't have to. They didn't have to do Bashar dirty like that, even though Bashar has done plenty of people dirty. Anyways, I'm Black Red Guard, and I'm going to crash.